Hello! I'm Elaine, and I'm a tour guide in the French Quarter. I do ghost tours. And I am not going to tell you the stories that I tell on my tour, because you gotta pay for those. But if you want to hear some interesting things that have happened to me while I'm leading random drunk people around the French Quarter, I got you. Most of my ghost tour guide stories feature the guests acting ridiculous, doing stupid things, being too drunk, acting wild, leaving me speechless with their oddity. But tonight, no, I proved that I am just as capable of being ridiculous as all my guests. So, there were only 2 tours starting at the same time tonight, one of which only had like 7 guests, and one of which, my tour, had like 20-something guests. So, of course, that meant that we were going to be the one meeting outside. And, because it's ever so slightly chilly out, I was sort of waiting to move all my guests outside because I didn't want them, getting too cold. And so I was greeting people inside the store, chatting with them, but that did mean that I knew that there was a chance I was chatting with some of the other tour guide's guests. And I know for a fact that I did chat with at least a couple of her guests. And then it was time for me to move my guests outside and gather everybody together. And my guests came together really quickly. I looked up and suddenly I had it looked like the 20 people I was supposed to have. So I quickly did a head count and I came up with 20. And I was supposed to have 21. So I was like, okay, so not everyone's here. So wait another 3 or 4 minutes, and it was getting closer to time and closer to time. And it was 2 minutes before start time. And I'm like, this is weird. I feel like everyone's here, but I counted 20 and no one else has come back. So I counted again and realized that there had been a relatively short woman that had been hidden by another woman. I was like, oh, so I have 21. I have everybody. I'll get started. And so I called everyone together, and just to make sure, because I was a little bit unsure, I was like, is anyone missing anyone from their group? No? Okay, we're gonna get started. And we're heading over, and I make it literally 2 feet when someone's like, oh my god, are you Elaine? And I'm like, yes. And they're like, is this person your sister? And I was like, yes. What the hell? And it was one of my sister's friends who was going to be in town and had talked to her about me and knew that I would be there. It was just like, hey! And I was like, I don't have time to be friendly, but hi, you seem nice. But then we go over to the start location and I start my rules, and I'm doing a head count in my head as I'm talking, which is a skill you pick up after having done this job for, a decade. And I kept coming up with 20, not 21. And I was like, what's going on here? And then suddenly the image of one guest flashed in my mind, and I was like, oh my god, there was that lady that I talked to in the store who was by herself. She's not here. And I literally stopped in the middle of what I was saying. I was like, guys, I hate to do this. I think I left someone at the store. I'm going to text the office to see it, text the store to see if they are there. And they were like, no, if you want to run back and get them, that's fine. I'm like, okay. So I take off running, because the first story happens about a block and a half away from the storefront. So I'm running back a block and a half, and I burst into the store, and the store worker, Joey, looks up at me like, what are you doing? And I'm like, I've left a guest behind. Where's my guest who I left behind? And he's like, there's nobody left behind. I was like, there was one lady who was by herself. I left her behind. And he was like, she went with Lisa. And I was like, oh, well, at least she's on a tour. Okay, as long as she's happy. And I burst out of the store and was running back and was halfway back when it popped into my head. Yeah, she wasn't meant to be on my tour. She was one of Lisa's guests. I had just chatted with her in the store. And I'm pulling out my phone as I'm running back over to my guest to check. And yeah, I did not have a single guest by themselves on this tour. So if I counted 20, that must have meant I just miscounted, because there is no way I was missing one guest otherwise. And I get back there and all my guests are so politely waiting for me and they're chatting. And I'm like, guys, I'm back. And I'm like, okay. And I try to run straight back into the rules where I was, only to realize I just run the equivalent of 3 blocks, and I'm not in great shape, and it takes a lot of lung capacity to be loud enough for 20 some odd guests. So I was suddenly realizing I don't have the breath to continue this story. But I was too embarrassed to just admit this and stop. So instead I did the rules in about half of the first story by going, and then this happened. And I could see all my guests looking at me like, is this the tour guide we're going to get? But luckily, thank God, my breathing regularized by halfway through the story, and my guests settled in, and it started to be an okay tour. And otherwise, it was a pretty simple,
awkward tour. There was a random fight that broke out on Bourbon Street about a block away from us, but like A, we were a block away, and B, it was small enough. I'm like, the guests weren't even sure it was a fight. And I'm like, if you have like 5 or 6 20-something guys running towards a location and hear a bang, yeah, there's a fight. But not like a scary bang, just like a somebody knocked over a barricade kind of bang. But yeah, other than that, it was a perfectly peaceful tour. And like honestly, I've had a couple of tours recently that started out being very nerve-wracking and ended up being perfectly peaceful. Like 2 nights ago, I had a girl on my tour that the store worker went out of their way to warn me she's tripping and this is her first ever acid trip. And she's a little bit out there. And yeah, she was a little bit out there. She did ask 1 or 2 ridiculous questions, but she was perfectly fine. She was super sweet. She stared in the lights a little bit more than most people do, but it was fine.
Don't forget to like and subscribe, and feel free to share your own experiences in the comments below.